This is Heartstock Radio. I'm your host, Carol Murphy. Today, our guest is Nicole Masters. She's the director of Integrity Soils, and she's also the author of For the Love of Soil. In just a moment, she's going to be with us, and I just found out a few moments ago, before I hit record, that she's a new resident of the state of Montana. I'm always excited when I get to speak to somebody in Montana. She will be with us here in just a moment. Thanks for listening. This is Heartstock.
As I went walking and ripping the highway, I saw above me that in the skyway, I saw below me that golden valley.
Welcome once again. This is Heartstock Radio. I'm Carol Murphy, your host, and Daniel Hogan is in the studio in Butte, of course, where we are recording. And hello, Nicole. Can you give our listeners just a little introduction here? What is Integrity Soils and what it is that you do there?
Hi, Carol. Yeah, thanks for having me. Integrity Soils is an agroecological coaching company, coaching and education. I've been doing this for over 20 years, so working with farmers and ranchers around restoring ecosystem function, profitability, and overall well-being and fun, I find, is one of the outcomes of the work that we do. Pre-COVID, we were working more consultancy one-on-one with producers, and these days we're predominantly providing education and training to organizations and to people interested in actually being an agroecologist in the field.
And how about your book? What is that about? I have to say, I'm listening to it on Audible. I've gotten through the first part of the book, but yeah, tell our listeners a little bit about that. It's awesome, by the way. I love it.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm often asked to write a book on soils for dummies, and that's not what this book was. I really dove into how is it that someone can build their soil health and start to be able to do their own diagnostics and feel for what does healthy soil look like? What are the microbes involved in building soil health? How does that relate to human health? And hopefully made it a lot of fun along the way. So it's people's stories and their journey from people I've worked with in North America, Australia, and New Zealand.
And I detect a little bit of an accent. And you do talk about, some of your life story and history in the book. But so you're from New Zealand, is that right?
From New Zealand, probably the last 10 years. I've been working in the US, in the last 5 years, really based more heavily in the US. And now, as of only like 10 days ago, I've brought a property in Paradise Valley in Montana. So I'm officially, a Montanan.
And what made you decide to come to Montana?
Oh, gosh, everyone asks me that, and it's so hard. The rocks is what brought me here, the river, the people, there's an extraordinary community living here in Montana. And right now I can't say I'm particularly enjoying it. It's like minus 12 degrees outside and blowing a gale. And I'm like, why am I here? But, it warms up. And then I remember that it is absolutely stunning here. And I think part of the appeal is it's not so heavily populated. As New Zealanders, we kind of like our personal space, and there's something great here. And I think the wildlife, the antelope, we've got, mule deer running past. This is the end of the migratory path for the elk that come out of the southern end of the park. It's the longest migration in the US, and they turn around basically at my house. So I just love that connection to the wild here.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Sure.
and you're actually the second person I know that is here from New Zealand, and I have never been to New Zealand, but we've all seen the pictures and how beautiful it is. So, are you homesick ever? Do you miss New Zealand?
Don't tell my 22-year-old son this, but no, I don't miss New Zealand at all. And it's weird because I've never lived further than 40 minutes from the ocean. I have my PADI diver's license. I've always been in the ocean. I've always fished, and I love the sea. And now to live so far away from it, I thought that I would miss that, but I kind of seem to get my fill in other ways. And I think New Zealand just started to hurt my heart so much from just the devastation that's happened in a very short amount of time from, New Zealand's one of the highest fertilizer users in the world, huge amounts of monocultures. They've jumped on this carbon bank runaway train, which is planting monoculture pine forest. And then to see, I don't know if people have been watching the news, but, in February, just the horrific flooding events that have happened in New Zealand, and just to see the devastation of poorly managed forestry. It's destroyed bridges, cut people off from communities, absolute massive flooding. And a big part of that is human induced.
Yes. And that could be a whole topic of discussion in and of itself.
Sure.
This is the point, right? This is the point.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
It is.
Why should we care about dirt? Please,
well, first off,
help
Carol,
us understand.
we call dirt swearing. It's another 4-letter word, which is a 4-letter word like love, which is soil. Because our entire society, culture, the way climate functions, water quality, acidification of the oceans, everything comes back to soil. And I think it's the disconnect from soil that's really led to so many issues in society and on the planet. And if we reconnected into the value of, building deep, rich topsoils, of which America had some of the most extraordinary soils, and that is what has enabled America to do so many of the things that this country's done. And now we literally are treating that soil like dirt.
Indeedy. So tell us where your journey with soil began, and how did you catch the soil bug, so to speak? Little play on words. Sorry, couldn't resist.
Yeah, I think my family will say it started the minute I could crawl. I was in the garden and eating snails and just breathing and eating a lot of soil, I think. But I think for me, I've never had this sense of disconnect. And I've lived in some of the biggest cities in the world. Like I lived in Hong Kong for, I think about 6 years. And that experience really made me realize how disconnected people can feel, and how actually a city can live in its own filth and squalor and be breathing in smog, and still that's not a catalyst to change. So I became very interested in the behavioral change side of things. What is it that enables someone to break a habit, for instance? And so half of my studies have been in soil and half of my studies have been in behavioral change. And so I think it's soil, just as it is trying to understand the human psyche, is a journey that never gets dull, and you never reach the end, and it's always exploration.
And when did you become a soil scientist?
I don't think I've ever called myself a soil scientist. So
aficionado?
Yeah. So my degrees are soil science and ecology, but an agroecologist is quite distinct in terms of we're looking at the world through ecological connections. We're looking for patterns. We're looking for how do we produce food in a way that brings vibrancy and more biodiversity and more health. And so soil science sometimes for me feels very dry. And when I did soil papers, there wasn't a lot of conversation about the aliveness and the biodiversity in soil. And I think part of what's happening in soil is the same thing that's happening in the human microbiome, in terms of just an explosion and the realization that microbiology is what, alters your mood. It's what, changes your cravings. And so the soil microbiome is really what dictates plant health, resilience, drought proofing, what attracts grasshoppers or not, for instance. And so I think we are seeing such a revolution in this space. It's very exciting to be involved in.
Yes, and I'm amazed with some of the books that I've read, just how interconnected everything is. Mm-hmm. So going back to your early days, were there influences that made you connect with the soil? Help us understand your journey?
My grandmother subscribed me to National Geographic when I was 5. And she also had the Encyclopedia Britannica. And I just was voracious for knowledge. But when I was 5 is when Mount St. Helens erupted. And I was reading National Geographic and just so awe-inspired by the power of the earth, that something like a volcano could blow up like that and totally change people's lives. And then to read through National Geographic in terms of that regeneration of that landscape, and, you know, when the animals came back and the plants came back, and just being really curious about that process. And I think National Geographic just opened my eyes to so many things. Like, I think of Jane Goodall's work with the chimpanzees, and how as a woman, she broke through what was happening in science, and she was seeing animals through a human veil. She wasn't trying to make animals all this scientific, separate, data-driven. She really brought a humanity to behavior in chimpanzees. And at the time, that was just such a revelation. And I think globally it was as well. But for a young person, just being like so captivated by the monkeys as well. So I think for me, there's so many pieces to this of like discovery and wonder. And I think that's what I see is the most successful of the producers I work with, are people that keep that wonderment. They are very curious. They're very interested in the world around them. And it's what enables them to be so successful, and also to, I think, really address some of the issues that we're facing in agriculture, which is around mental health and around financial issues and around the destruction of ecosystems. And so, yeah, I think wonder for me is a key part of what I do.
And how about your schooling? Was that in New Zealand? You said soil science and behavior?
Yeah. So I did ecology to start with, soil science, and then I went on to do my masterate studies through the geography department, which is where you can study things like organizational learning, which is business, through the veil of ecological thinking. And then since then, certainly so much of this is happening outside the academic university system. I just finished a course in the neuroscience of change. So what are we learning about the human body and the brain in terms of learning, and how to create environments that really enable people to learn more effectively or enable them to change behaviors? And so, yeah, that's been a lot of fun. So I just feel like that academic foundation really just gave me the ability to look, you know, through research and do literature research, and that like expansion of my ability to learn, but really isn't the material that I built my life and career on.
And what brought you to the United States? When did that happen? Was it after and kind of a result of the book?
No, so I've been here since 2013. I was invited to speak at a Ranching for Profit event, which was just an extraordinary conference. And there were like 600 ranchers there. And I walked down the stairs into the lobby, and, you know, this guy takes off his hat, says, "Howdy, ma'am," opens the door. And I'm like, you people are real? Like, I just kind of thought, you know, cowboys were something you read about. And to get here into the West and meet people that authentically are living in the landscape and living with horses, was something that I found really inspiring, coming from New Zealand. And just, you know, the big sky is very different from the New Zealand landscape. But I've always just found people to be, the ones I work with, just really authentic, you know, and I think there's a big part of the polarization that's happening in this country. And actually at the heart of it, 80% of people really genuine and, you know, really do care. And it's just these loud, polarized voices that we hear from. And, that for me is quite interesting. Just that world that maybe people outside of America see Americans as being is not the reality when you work here.
We're going to take our midway point break here, and we're going to dive into soils more and talk about your work. We'll be right back. This is Heartstock. Welcome back. This is Heartstock Radio. I'm your host, Carol Murphy, and we're speaking with Nicole Masters today. And the thing that struck me the most, when I took soil science courses in undergrad, there wasn't a whole lot of information about microbes. And, I think the field has just expanded exponentially in that regard. Help us understand what is going on in the soil.
Yeah.
What do we know now?
Well, I think what we know now or understand more about soil is how little we know and just how much, we call it the chatter that's happening underground, that there is literally a universe. There's more biodiversity in soil than any other ecosystem. And that biodiversity is there to support healthy production of plants, trees, animals. All of it is built upon this framework. And those microbes are doing things like communicating actively with plants, and plants the same way. A plant will send a signal to certain groups of microbiology to say, hey, I need this kind of nutrient, or I'm under attack from an insect. And that microbe can actually provide what we call these secondary metabolites, these chemical signals that enable a plant to defend itself. And what's interesting is the plant can't do it without these microbial partners. So we know there's a huge amount of diversity just with the main groups. You're thinking bacteria and fungi and protozoa and nematodes, so all the things that we can't see. But what's interesting is the most common organism in soil is viruses. And we know very little about what viruses do, except they control the overpopulation of things like bacteria. That a bacteria itself can live forever, can live for millions of years. And it really is, at the end of the day, a virus that will take it out and mean that it won't live forever as such. So I think of soil as an underground metropolis. There's services under there. There's a hospital, there's a school, there's a bank account, there's a pub even, or a saloon that we have where organisms can go to. They might be producing antibiotics. They might be communicating or hunting together, even though they don't have eyes. They have the ability to communicate. And you think every single cell has 100,000 receptors on that single cell, and it's waiting for some kind of chemical signal. And so everything in soil is about listening for and responding to these signals. So some of those signals might be to turn off, they might be to turn into something virulent, but all of this is what enables plants themselves to be healthy. So I want you to think of a plant as having its gut system outside of its body. So just as we're beginning to understand more about the human gut microbiome and its relationship to nearly every single disorder we seem to be facing, it's the same with the plant. And that plant is outsourcing those services, it's outsourcing its immune system, how it gets nutrition, and then it affects the quality of what we're eating. So there's so many of these chemicals that we're just understanding now. So let's take one, and it's called ergothioneine. It's produced in the plant with the presence of beneficial fungi. Why we need that in our diet is it's been related to longevity. So it's something that if we are ingesting, it's an essential, well, not an essential amino acid, but an amino acid that actually can contribute to longevity. And this is just something we discovered in the last year. And it's like, we know so very little about what's going on. And it's just this constant page turner.
And I'm hoping you can kind of give our listeners a taste of what it's like to work with Integrity Soils. Maybe you can share, real life experience of how you've helped someone really improve their facilities and production by changing the soil.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So many people come to mind. And it's interesting because, like I said, pre-COVID, I really stopped working one-on-one with people. So now I'm working more with organizations or training coaches. So training people to deliver these programs. But one of the reasons I first arrived in Montana was to work with a couple of ranchers. And one of those included the Ingerland family, Roger and Betsy, Kate and Ann Ingerland, just out of Big Timber. And what was fascinating about working with them is just their curiosity and their interest in understanding their landscapes, but also, what could be possible here? What did this landscape used to look like? And some of the early steps that we took, and certainly I say we very liberally. I mean, really, it's the ranchers that are taking these actions. They took their relative feed value from 155 to 222. What that means in layman's terms is that they've increased the effectiveness of the actual pasture that they're grazing upon. And in some ways, you can almost think of it as they've actually just brought another quarter of their property again inland in terms of the effectiveness of animals not needing to eat as much because they're getting more effectiveness with each mouthful. So we see animals that spend more time lying down. We see improvements in animal performance and animal health. And I mean, they already had extraordinary animals anyway through their breeding program, but just seeing some of the issues that had been happening in the past disappear. But also what was interesting is to see the resilience of that property in terms of how quickly it could bounce back after a drought. Driving around and just seeing the horrors of the grasshoppers in the 2021 year, 2022, when we really just were seeing extraordinary, and 2020, grasshopper numbers, is they might have a couple of grasshoppers, but nothing that was causing economic harm. And then when you went out into the fields to see the incredible numbers of spiders, and at the bottom of each of these spider webs are all these little carcasses of the grasshoppers, and thinking, wow, I mean, the grasshopper explosion is really only enabled because there's no predators. If you have an ecosystem that has those predators intact, then they'll control things like grasshoppers. And if we're seeing huge populations of spiders, it's because the spiders are feeding on something smaller, which means it's an indicator for the amount of biomass of microbiology that's happening in the soil. So really, really cool to see. We saw an explosion of just diversity of plant species. And there wasn't just one thing that any producer that I work with, you're not just looking at, okay, I'm going to intensify my grazing or I'm going to enable more rest. It might be we're doing things with probiotics with livestock to improve the efficacy and their own gut health. A lot of the work we do is looking at what's happening with mindset, what is happening with the mindset of the producers in terms of, do you feel like weather's to blame? Do you feel like it's politics to blame for the situation you're in? Or where can we get to? Where are we accountable in what's been happening? There's a saying which says, if you think you can or you think you can't, then you're right, no matter what, if that's your attitude. And so part of this is working with people and looking at, where can I be response able? Where can I build resilience in an ecosystem? And I was reading an account. It was a cavalry. They were moving through Texas through to Colorado, and they were talking about driving through shortgrass prairie with their wagons, and they had 1,000 horses. And what they had to do is they actually had to put stakes in the ground so that the caravans further back could see where they had traveled, because with their 1,000 horses going over the ground, the minute they passed over it, the grass would bounce back. And you wouldn't be able to see where the 1,000 horses and these guys had gone through with their carts and their oxen. And we don't even know what we've lost. We can't even imagine ecosystems functioning like that because everything's so bristled. The nutrition's gone, the water holding capacity, the fungi have gone, and fungi play an integral role in water holding and water movement through soil. And so it's just working with producers like the Indrelans to reconnect to this deep value of microbiology in terms of, do we want to have systems that work no matter what the climate's throwing at us, or do we just give up? Because, there's some pretty hard stuff happening in the country right now.
Mm-hmm. What lays ahead? You mentioned that you changed your business model a bit, and I'm wondering, how is that going to impact your future? And are you planning seminars and or is it strictly online?
Well, taking on this property has been very exciting. So I will be running workshops from here in Paradise Valley, so people can look at what does it look like to take on a really degraded piece of land and how quickly can we regenerate it. Because I think in the past we felt like this is something that takes a long time, and what I'm seeing is people transform soils so fast. so much faster than I ever thought was possible. And that's kind of what I want to be able to demonstrate from here. We're going to set up a learning center and be able to run workshops for up to 200 people. And so I'm very excited about that. And in the meantime, we still have our coaching program. We're taking that to the UK in September. And in that, we're really just working with, agroecologists, people that want to coach or consult or facilitate or educate others. And it's a really deep dive professional development program.
Is there another book in the works?
Yeah. Yes, there is. And I think it's, one of these things, it's like just a little seedling that you want to keep watering every now and then. And it's sprouting right now in terms of thinking around the coaching piece and the mindset piece and how it is that we've managed to have some of the successes that we've been able to have when working with people. And really, like, the term agroecological coach is, I don't think it really was existing in the world. Like, it's a very new domain. It's a very exciting space to be working in. And I think it has implications for lots of other fields of education or working with people or working with landscapes. So I think the book possibly will go down that angle. But also I'm very interested in the health side of things and how we can reprogram what we're seeing right now, which a lot of this is epigenetics and human health and human behavior. So I think there's a part of the book that will be focusing on that as well.
Got about a minute left, and I'm wondering if you have any shout outs for partners that have been instrumental in your journey, and then of course how folks might find you.
Oh gosh, there's so many people that I'm grateful for. I think Megan Lannon, who's at Barney Creek Livestock, is on my team and just a phenomenal force for action. Older Spring Ranch, I just love what they're doing. James Ranch down in Durango, Piscedes, Tomcats, Temple Creek Ranch. Just, I'm very, very grateful to call these ranches my friends, and that made a huge difference in my life. Yeah, and if people are interested in looking into more about what we're doing, we do have a website, which is integritysoils.com.
Thanks, Nicole, for sharing your story and writing your book and coming to Montana, for heaven's sakes. It's amazing.
My pleasure.
Indeed.
Absolute pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
And as usual, we will be back next week. Until then, peace.
As I went walking, I saw a sign.
Heartstock Radio is a production of KBMF 102.5 Butte America Radio. Hear our programs every Friday at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time via livestream at butteamericaradio.org.
It didn't say